So we appreciate everyone coming to take an interest in what we're going to talk about tonight. And the purpose of tonight's meeting is to educate the community about how this transportation planning process is going to go. I can understand that there's a little bit of confusion, maybe a little bit of rumors and fear of the unknown, or people just generally want to know things. And this transaction with the hospital has transpired very, very quickly. There's a lot of very complex moving parts that occurred up to this point to where we could get a purchase agreement executed so then we can have some funding come in and start these transportation studies. So the things that we're going to talk about tonight, we've been talking about as a staff level and with consultants preparing to enter into the transportation process for some time. But it's not, with all of the different moving parts that we have, it's a matter of getting the pieces in place to get the funding from the deposit of the hospital and actually bring people on board. And then once we have an actual surety that the project is likely to move forward, then we start the actual transportation process. So tonight's meeting is basically community education, and we're going to be here as long as we need to be here tonight, since we have the project team here, so that you can walk out with a clear understanding of what the process is going to look like, what some of the key dates are, what some of the project goals are, who you can contact if you have concerns, and so on. We will talk about, I'll introduce the project team. We'll talk a little bit about the study area. We'll look at just a very basic look at the proposed site plan for the hospital and talk a little bit about trip generation on that. We'll go over the project goals. We'll look at the study process. Again, we'll talk about opportunities for public input, and then we'll give you a very rough schedule that we have. So I'll start with the project team. City of Marquette. I'm Dennis Stackwitz, Director of Planning and Community Development for the City of Marquette. With us here tonight, I have Greg Borzik, who is our Assistant City Engineer. Dave Stensis is our City Planner. Wes Butch is with DLZ. They are our Transportation Planning Consultant. We have Aaron Johnson from MDOT. Aaron is your TSC Manager for the Ishpeming TSC, and Rob Turbo is with us as well. Rob is Aaron's right-hand man, and MDOT has been, we consider them partners, although they are the agency that has to help us through the approval process and approve things along with the Federal Highway Administration. So technically, they're really not somebody that we would consider, part of the project team, other than the fact that they work with us really great, and I appreciate the good work that they do for us. And from day one, when we were first conceptualizing and trying to keep the hospital in the city of Marquette, we were making phone calls to them and working with them and throwing ideas off them about what we would have to do to be able to accomplish some things for the safety of the community. We'll take a brief look at the hospital site plan. Oh, I'm sorry. Dave reminded me we have Greg Zarnek. Greg is the Chief Project Leader for the construction management, design management, and everything related to the new hospital. And they have been a great partner as well. On the surface, a lot of people don't get to see the things that happen behind the scenes. On the surface, and sometimes through the media, it seems like things just occur with DLP, but there's a lot of discussion and coordination that happens behind the scenes. Greg is a busy guy. When we need something from him, the turnaround is ridiculous. It's like within a half hour, he has an answer for us day or night, and they've been really good partners. They've been amenable to working with us. This is the site plan that they have presented to the City Planning Commission and the City Commission, which it was just recently approved in preliminary phase this past Monday. We're looking at it was a 285 bed approximately facility. It's going to occupy the site of the old Roundhouse property. And one of the things that we're looking at on this site plan, and what you've seen a lot of is you've seen a lot of drawings of a roundabout or something on here. And we decided, you know what, we're gonna take that off of there so we can assure the community that through this transportation planning process, we as a project team and as a community and as transportation professionals don't have any preconceived notions about what's gonna occur there. We're gonna walk through the process to come with the best option. But I'm sure many people have seen this. It's been in the news. If you have more questions about it, Dave Stensis, our city planner, is a good resource. He shepherded the process through the Planning Commission. He can talk a lot about what the Planning Commission looked at. We have Planning Commission member Steve Laurie is here as well that went through some of that process. So I don't want to talk about this too much, but just with the recognition that this is a major facility. There's going to be a need for access off of the highway. Because of that access and the transportation and trip generation that it's going to produce. And what we mean by trip generation is the number of vehicles that facility is going to produce. In the planning and engineering world, we can say a building that is a hospital that has X number of beds is going to produce 475 vehicle trips a day, and we call that trip generation. But it's kind of engineer speak, but you know what we're looking at is you have a major facility that's going to cause a lot of trips per day, and it needs to be looked at through a viable transportation planning process. Next one. Okay, at this point in time, I will talk a little bit just generally about the study area. This is the facility itself. Just because these blue lines fall right here, it doesn't mean that we don't care what people think outside of the box, right? All this means, these lines right here mean these are our areas or topics of concern when it comes to actual traffic and how it's going to flow on 7th Street, a couple of blocks, the intersections, Fisher Rock, West Baraga, Homestead, and through Wilson and the rest of Baraga and so on and so forth. So I'm really going to turn it over to Wes because he's going to start getting a little technical into the process here and kind of walk you folks through some of the goals of what we're looking at doing, and he's a better one to do that than I. Here you go, Wes. Thank you.
Thanks, Dennis. Dennis gave me a brief introduction earlier. My name is Wes Butch, and I work for DLZ. We're an engineering company. I work out of our Lansing office. I'm originally from Gladstone. I lived there up until I was about 20. So working on Lansing right now, and we are hired by the city to conduct the studies that are needed for the traffic and road improvement studies, as well as getting approval from MDOT and Federal Highway Administration at the end of the process. So we wanted to start by talking about what are the project goals. And so the project team has identified a number of important goals that are driving the process. First is to accommodate the current and the future traffic volumes that would result from the hospital relocation. Dennis talked about the number of trips that are going to be coming and going at the hospital. Second goal is to provide efficient access to the hospital on and off US 41 for all the users, including emergency vehicles. Very important to be able to have easy access in and out from the main highway. Third bullet here is that whatever road improvements come out of this, we want to make sure that they can handle all of the different modes of travel. So if there's an opportunity for bikes or pedestrians to be incorporated, that's important too. We want to make sure that we look at that. And similarly, improving safety. If there's an opportunity to improve safety as part of this, we want to make sure we have that considered. Next bullet, very important that through this process that we try to minimize any negative impacts to any property owners, residents, as well as any natural resources in the area like Whetstone Brook. And then last, at the end of the process, we need to make sure that we obtain approval from MDOT and Federal Highway Administration, since US 41 is under jurisdiction of those two agencies. So Dennis talked about the possibility that has been talked about of a roundabout on 41 at the entrance to the hospital. We wanted to let everybody know tonight that that is only one of many options that are on the table. Right now, as of tonight, we have not identified options that are going to be developed. And that's really why we're here tonight, is we want to hear your input before we start developing different options that are going to be considered. So far, just to let you know, there's a number of improvements that have been talked about, and none of these yet are framed into any one that's preferred over others. We wanted to walk through those with you so you knew what some of the options are. The goal is, after we hear your input tonight, that we're going to look at these possibilities and come up with 3 different options that are going to get compared in detail. And some of these options might include multiple items on this list. So that's where we want to go after we hear your input tonight. So one option would be a roundabout intersection on 41 at the main hospital entrance, or possibly also roundabout at the intersection of Grove and 7th. So that's one option. Another option would be a traffic signal intersection at the same 2 locations. Another option could be a traffic signal intersection at the hospital entrance with the indirect left turns, the Michigan lefts. And that's like what right now is at McClellan, where if you want to make a left turn, you turn right and you go to the median turnaround and then you come back through. So that's another option that's on the table. Another option could be, in combination with something else, a bridge that connects Grove and 7th over 41. That's one option. There may be some local street realignments or rerouting needed on the local streets to tie into whatever else is happening. We're also going to look at various locations of where might be the best driveway access point for the hospital. One thing that could come out of it is, are there changes needed at the intersection with McClellan and 41? And then we've got the other category here. If we hear other good ideas tonight or as we're working through this, we certainly want those to be on the table as well. So the idea here is wide range of options, and we would welcome your input on any and all of these. Okay, so this is a flow chart. Some people like flow charts, other people maybe not so much, but this is a flow chart that shows the process we have to go through. So we need to, I mentioned earlier, ultimately arrive at the end of the process of approval from Federal Highway Department regarding whatever road improvements are going to happen here. So in order to get there, what the process is, the main steps that we're going to follow. So first, we determine what is the purpose of the project and the need for the project. That's the project goals. Tonight we're here. We're getting your input. We want to hear your thoughts about the whole process. Next, we'll develop 3 different options and evaluate those. Then we will come back to you, the public, for another public information meeting to tell us what you think about these 3 options. So we're going to do that before there's any decision of selecting the best option, which would be called the preferred alternative. This meeting here, the date that we put here is incorrect. Apologize for that. It's actually going to be targeted for February. Coming up February is when this meeting is targeted, the next public meeting. So after there's a preferred option, then we have to prepare a document that's called an environmental assessment, and this is required by Federal Highway Administration. So we prepare that, and that document is released to the public for everybody to review, and there's an official public comment period. And during that time, we have an official public hearing. It's another meeting where people can come and give us their input on that. And then after the public hearing, there's some time to prepare some revised information, and then ultimately Federal Highway Administration decision. So that's the steps that we have to walk through to comply with the federal process. And MDOT is going to be a very important partner working with the city as we go through this.
One thing I was thinking about, maybe if we could go back a little bit, if you could, folks see environmental assessment and automatically think about trees. Could you talk a little bit about socioeconomics? Yeah.
Great point, Dennis. The environmental assessment report is, even though it's called environmental assessment, it also includes lots of information about what would be the effects of a project upon people. So it's not just trees and streams and wetlands, et cetera. It also has quite a bit of information about how many people's properties would be affected, how might it affect access to properties, also what would be noise levels in the area from the road improvements. Would there be economic impacts to people as a result of the different options? So this is definitely, even though it's called an environmental assessment, it looks at all effects of the project, not only those on environmental natural resources. The timeline, we were asked quite a bit already tonight during the open house about what is the timeline for the process. So here we laid out basically the same steps I just talked about, except we put them in a list with some approximate dates on the right side. We're here tonight, the second row at the public information meeting. So we're going to be collecting data and identifying the 3 options that are going to be studied in detail by October. Then we will be also doing some fieldwork studies for the EA in the fall. The evaluation of the 3 alternatives will happen approximately in January. Then we'll come back to you, to the public again in February, hear your input, and then shortly after that meeting, the target date for selecting the preferred alternative is also in February, followed up by the traffic study that is required by MDOT and the environmental assessment in the spring. Public hearing, this is the formal public hearing, again, to get public input regarding the EA document, and that's in the spring. And then the target for federal highway approval is late spring or summer. We put summer on there because that could be a little longer sometimes for them to make a decision. Back to Dennis.
Okay, thank you. So before I forget, I'm in this mode of speaking when it's in my head because it'll be gone in 30 seconds. The sign-in sheets are really important for public input because one of the first things we're going to do is take this presentation and a lot of the background information, and we're going to create a project website on the city website, a project page. What I'd like to do is have email addresses from folks, because what we'll do is we'll generate an email to you and we'll set it up when the page is active, and then if there's any updates, we'll send out subsequent information as well. How can people be involved? Number one, you're here tonight and we appreciate it. And another way to be involved is to keep engaged with that project website that we're going to have set up. We have comment sheets. Feel free to take more than one. If you have a neighbor that's interested that wasn't here that has some concerns, or maybe they're just a little bit shy and they don't want to come out in the public, go ahead and hand them that piece of paper, and we take public from them at all times. We'll have public hearing, as Wes had mentioned, that's going to be in the spring. The comment forms, or you can call me. That's my direct line. You're not going to get press 1 for community development or whatever it is. This is a small town, and I believe in you folks having access to us, and I want to hear from you. That's my number. That's my email address. Please do that. Please share your thoughts with us. Share that amongst the community, because it's important. You know, as we go through this process, we really like to hear from the people, so we have the feedback as close to the front end as possible. What we appreciate is, like I said, letting us know now, rather than the Monday morning quarterback, right? That's probably a bad analogy, but sometimes that occurs, right? And that's why I really, as your community development director, appreciate you folks taking the time to be here tonight, because you're going to let us know what you think. We're about to pass the microphone around and have a little bit of open forum while we have these folks here, and we want to hear from you on the front end during the, what was the term they use at the federal government, the sausage making phase, right? This is where we're making the sausage, and it's not always nice, but you participate and you do that up front. So these are, I think we'll leave this up for the rest of the evening, so that way you can copy the information for myself, and please sign in. Now what we're going to do at this point in time is all of our project folks here are pretty much available, and since they're here tonight and you took the time to come out, we're going to give you an opportunity to give us some feedback. So if I could hand this microphone to Dave, and Dave will pass the microphone around to the first person who would like to ask us a question.
Any takers?
I've always had some questions, starting a year ago when the first map came out, showing the bridge over the highway at Grove Street and the roundabout west of there. And at first, it really seemed crazy, and maybe it still seems crazy. It seems like when you look at the Grove Street intersection with the bypass, I drive over that quite often, and there's a lot of turning movements there. You know, it's not just 7th Street from the north feeds the university, feeds the hospital where it is now. There's quite a bit of traffic that turns at the Grove Street intersection to go north to those facilities, or coming back the other way and going wherever back to their homes, in the evenings. And it seems like it would be really difficult to take care of those turning movements with the space that's there, with the bridge over the highway right there. I know there's Chippewa Square there on the south side of the highway. You have some folks that just bought the old vineyard there. And, to me, if I had just bought that to try to run a retail business there, I would feel like somebody was trying to stab me in the heart if they're going to do that to the intersection. I know access is a concern of MDOT, those businesses all the time. Putting a roundabout in the middle of a highway, and I don't know at this point if you have your traffic counts and everything, but it can be quite a busy highway at times, and all of a sudden you got to put people coming around the circle. Couple of complaints that I have about the existing roundabout that we have. It's a very tight circle, and of course, whoever, the beautification committee or whatever, has planted the center of that circle virtually solid, so that when you can actually see a car coming, if they're in the circle or not, you don't have that much of a warning if somebody's already in the circle. The northbound Front Street lane, I never could understand why that was put in the circle, so that you get to make about 4 or 5 turning movements just to go straight through on Front Street. So, roundabouts can be great, but there's some problems associated with those also. I think what we hear from the highway department is that the right-of-way was too tight to do anything else with it, and yet, southbound front to westbound bypass and eastbound bypass to southbound front were not put in the circle. The more cars you put in the circle, the more congested things get, etc. I'm sure you guys know that, you've worked with it before. One of the thoughts that I had was the possibility of, we know the hospital wants the access. Maybe it's primarily for the quick, easy access for the emergency vehicles. Maybe that's the primary reason. But if you took where the roundabout was proposed, that you took off of these drawings, for eastbound Highway 41, if you just tried to figure out how you could just maybe take a turning lane off of that and bridge over the westbound lane to get into the hospital, and then bridge over the westbound lane coming out of the hospital to get back on the eastbound lanes. And you wouldn't have to monkey with some kind of bridge at Grove Street, which, any way you look at that Grove Street potential bridge, it's going to be an awful long bridge, and a fairly expensive bridge. So I guess that's primarily my comments.
Can I get you to clarify what you were talking about with regard to the bridge? And so if I understood right, you were talking about eastbound here could have a bridge up over the westbound lanes here and into the hospital?
Right, and then you'd have to have another one coming out of there to go east, right? So your
Okay.
emergency vehicles coming in could easily access the hospital from either direction from 41. And also leaving the hospital to go on their runs, they would have easy access to westbound, they would also have easy access to eastbound on the highway.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else?
I'm a property owner on South 7th Street, and since they put South 7th Street through, across Washington Street and between Washington and Spring Street, traffic is just pretty much unbelievable. At certain times of the day, it can take you easily 5 minutes to pull out of a driveway. I'm concerned that traffic will increase on South 7th Street with the hospital in the vicinity. And it'll be unbearable, pretty much. The proposed bridge over the bypass connecting South 7th and Grove Street, will that still have access to the bypass in both directions? If the bridge is built, there will still be access to the bypass?
Right now, the way the bridge has been considered so far, there was not access there. So if we were to have a bridge there with access, essentially what it would be is like a freeway interchange. You'd have some kind of ramps
Right.
there. Okay.
Well, if there is no access to the bypass, I would think that that would cut the traffic on South 7th Street somewhat. They'd have to find another way to get to the bypass.
Yeah.
Right now, it seems like about half the traffic that comes from South 7th to the bypass, about half of it goes to Grove Street, and about half of it turns on the bypass right now. So if we're cutting half the traffic, that would be an improvement. And the other question I had was about street realignments. What are you talking about there? What streets?
So again, right now, we haven't determined yet where the possible locations of an intersection might be. If, and remember, this is only one scenario, if the main entrance is somewhere in this area, and if there was a bridge here, again, hypothetical, then it's a possibility of trying to connect some of the local roads on the south side into the same intersection. Again, that's not what we're advocating right now at this point, but there's those kind of scenarios, depending on where there's an access point along the bypass, then there may be a need to reconfigure local roads to help the traffic get to wherever that is located. So that's one of the options still on the table.
Is South 7th Street one of the streets to be realigned?
Again, haven't looked at the details yet, but if 7th Street if there was an intersection upgrade here, the north leg 7th Street might need to get adjusted to come into the intersection to maximize safety. So it's possible, but I don't think anybody so far has brought up the idea of a very significant shift. Your comment brought up one point that I wanted to make sure that everybody is clear about. That's one of the issues going on here. This segment of the bypass is considered a limited access facility by Federal Highway Administration. And so when the road was built using federal money, one of the restrictions that was put on it is that there's a limited number of access points where there's crossroads and people can get on and off the bypass. And with that being the case, one of the factors that has to be considered in the study is, could there be reasonable access provided with the same number of access points? In other words, one possibility is, if there was a new access point here, might it require closing that one? And that's a question that MDOT and Federal Highway Administration are going to have to consider as we go through this study. So that's one of the factors in here. some people might be wondering if there was a new access point here, well, why was it considered to put a bridge here? And the answer would be that that could be driven by the number of access points and keeping the same total number. Now, right now, again, it's not decided that it has to be the same number, but it's a factor that Federal Highway Administration and MDOT will have to consider because of the designation of this originally as a limited access facility.
Anybody else?
Thank you. I'm a business owner in Chippewa Square. We're obviously concerned about anything that eliminates access to the several retail and professional offices that serve people there, as well as Norlight Nursing Home, which is right across the street from Grove Street. So in looking at the potential of eliminating the Grove Street intersection, we're very concerned that that will isolate 500 to 600 people a day that come to use our properties. And as business owners and taxpayers, we're obviously concerned about that. A question that I would have is whether or not there would be consideration of a roundabout, if that were the proposed access to the hospital, that would be located in such a way that it would combine the 7th Street, Grove Street intersection with access to the hospital.
Yeah, I think at this point, that would be an option that's on the table.
I have a question about the project process schedule. In February of 2016, you have the selection of preferred alternative. Maybe you or Dennis could answer this. Who is going to make that selection?
Yes. The selection of the preferred alternative, what we plan on doing is bringing it back to the community for feedback and data gathering. Once we get the data gathering and feedback from the community, then we would advance that through the normal process that we do. So you would have your planning commission take a look at that, and ultimately we would send that up to the city commission.
Okay, why I mentioned that is those two instances appearing at the planning commission and the city commission are opportunities for public input. And that's not on there, but that's probably the most critical time of this whole process. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's great to point that out.
You consider access roads at all possible? You know, we look at roundabouts, bridges, all that stuff, but you know, in the bigger cities, if access roads, all these malls, hospitals, side streets and stuff like that, you know, obviously there's not a lot of room and tunneling would be way too expensive, but I don't know if there's any way, like people are talking about, if there was a roundabout or a major intersection at Grove Street, if there was a way to make an access road along the edge of the highway with direct access to the hospital. There's a wetland area, there's all kinds of other areas, but just a possibility, maybe an access road on both sides, just to ease traffic, so we don't have to have a roundabout right in the middle, but they could still have direct access to the hospital.
So what you're talking about would be a roundabout somewhere in this area,
Yeah.
and then there would be a frontage road or access road close to the bypass, which would run to the hospital or other areas.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. We'll put that on the list of things to consider.
I would also add, Butch, if you don't mind, Wes, that Baraga Street itself is going to be, as far as the site plan now that was approved, is a major access to the facility. Anyone else?
guess the time is free, so we might as well use it. One of the things that I had even thought about, when maybe I'm just gonna throw this out first, my background is engineering. I've previously, many years ago, worked for MDOT, I worked for the Minnesota Highway Department, Milwaukee County, City of Waukesha, and I've been a consultant for 40-plus years. But looking at 7th Street there, somewhere in the area of Spring Street, or just to the north of it, coming down from the overpass of the bike path, I had always thought, well, maybe you could kind of just curve 7th Street or a new street. It would probably entail 1 or 2 or 3 of those houses, to do that. And get behind the houses and come down behind the houses on 7th Street between Baraga and Fisher Street to get back down to the highway. I don't know how many properties that would entail, but when I look at the time I spent in the city of Waukesha, if it was identified that we really needed some private properties, we'd start to approach those people. And it seems like around Marquette for the last 40-plus years, it's like they don't even want to consider that, And I know if you don't have to do it, it's great. But there's some instances, you're looking at something here that's going to be, we're not just doing this for this year or for the next 5 years. You're doing this for the next probably 100 years with what's done there. It's something to consider. I don't know what the thoughts are. I know obviously if somebody approaches you and say, hey, we really we're considering, we need your house, we need your property. There's a business down there, right, electric, and But if the deal is right, and you can, maybe that's part of the answer to this too.
So were you describing pulling 7th somewhere in here?
Right, to get behind, again, you might have to take a house or two and maybe write electric down there, which is on the north side of Fisher Street, but you would get, it would take that traffic off of 7th Street too, which once that the connection was made to Washington Street, like one lady said here, the South 7th Street there, traffic probably increased 20-fold or more. And it's a narrow street, it really, that's the other problem. A lot of these streets were platted 100 years ago. They're narrow right-of-ways. It's just a problem. It's a problem to construct them, to reconstruct them in a way that you're going to be able to take those higher traffic volumes. And you add into that the topography, South 7th Street, you're way down low there, north of Baraga Avenue by Spring Street, and then you climb the big hill, and then you come back down to the bypass again. So, you throw all those things in there, and there's a lot of problems trying to figure that out.
Anyone else?
Come on, don't be shy. Nobody wants to come up to point on the map and say, this is where I live at, what's gonna happen to me, or we're gonna save that for afterwards. So we don't have any more questions from anyone from a group as a whole, but as I promised you earlier, we're gonna go ahead and shut this projector down, and we're all gonna hang around. And that way, if some questions came up while you're watching this presentation, you'll have access to us. And as well, you'll have access to us through other means. We'll leave this slide up, but thank you for coming. We do appreciate it. Tell your neighbor what you learned, good or bad. If you don't like it, tell your neighbor. It's just going to make them get involved, and it's going to help us clearly understand the dynamics or challenges that people may perceive with the project. So thanks a lot for coming, and then we'll remain around for a little while.